No preamble, let's just get to the fucking point. No, I'm not grumpy, you're grumpy. I happen to have read the 1983 novella The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, which this film and its earlier 1989 adaptation for ITV is based on, and whilst I can appreciate the quiet, low-key creepiness of the novel, I can definitely understand a lot of the embellishments that were added into its subsequent adaptations. Quite frankly, if you deign to be 100% faithful and accurate to the source material on this one, then what you'd end up with is about an hour tops of a pale-looking 19th century gentleman cycling around a dreary village, sifting through large swaths of paperwork in a dusty mansion. Works on paper with the right scribe, on screen it's coma material. But whilst Nigel Kneale, the legendary British TV writer and creator of the Quatermass series, took the genteel English ghost story and adapted it to screen with subtly chilling effect, Jane Goldman and James Watkins take this premise and do what most horror filmmakers do nowadays: jump out and yell boo. Don't get me wrong here, The Woman in Black 2012 is not a bad film by any stretch. It's nicely filmed, the settings are effective and atmospheric, no one really gives a bad performance, and some of the ideas and embellishments are enjoyable. It just happens to be one of those films where the plot often takes a backseat to people walking down dark corridors investigating noises that no one in their right goddamn mind would ever bother to. In short, it's British The Conjuring with nicer visuals and a template based on a classic ghost story. And you know what that means? That's right, this monkey toy gets a half a dozen side movies. Daniel Radcliffe plays Arthur Kipps, a young lawyer whose wife dies in childbirth and is left to provide and care for his young son. Unfortunately, this is early 1900s Great Britain, and people think mental health leave is when you go to the local sanitarium and pay to poke the inmates with a walking stick and laugh. So Arthur's boss issues an ultimatum. "Very sorry about your dead wife and all, old chap, but get back to work or you're fired." As such, Arthur accepts an assignment to the small village of Crithen Gifford to sort through the affairs of the recently deceased Alice Drablow, who, as it happens, lived in a house on a small island connected to the mainland via a path surrounded by foggy marshes, which tends to disappear underwater for large portions of the day. There's also a crucifix sticking up out of the marsh. The only way this could be more of a red flag is if Satan himself were standing at the mouth of the road with a sign saying "Rapist Clown Party this way." Naturally, not one person in the whole village wants to accommodate Arthur, let alone speak of the place, so he ends up having to bribe a local horse and carriage man named Keckwick, whose name amuses me for some reason, to take him out to Eel Marsh House and complete his assignment. He sees the eponymous Woman in Black and finds out that whenever someone sees the ghost of the woman, a child in the village inevitably dies. Which leads me to a few questions. First of all, how far from the house is the Woman in Black's influence? Obviously it extends to the village, but what about beyond? If not, and given that so many people have been victimised by the Woman in Black in the form of their children's horrible deaths, why not just leave? I mean, what are you leaving behind, really? Economic prosperity? I know that if I happen to live in a rundown hole in the middle of nowhere with no career prospects and a madman who stabbed my dog to death if I so much as spy him wanking into the flower bed at the end of my garden, I'd swallow any sentimental feelings I had and get on the next bus to anywhere that doesn't have that. Secondly, if leaving really is out of the question, and by extension so is burning down the house and or blowing up the pathway with dynamite, why give Arthur the cold shoulder? I mean, it's not like he knows. You could try, I don't know, telling him about the Curse Lady. Sure, he may not believe you, but if it really is a matter of your children's lives, then I'd at least give it a go. Worst case scenario, he thinks you're a bit loony and goes anyway. Best case scenario, he still thinks you're a bit mental, but decides not to chance it, goes back home and gets a job as a chimney sweep. Like I said before, it's not a bad movie as such. As was previously stated, it's nicely shot and well acted. The jump scares, though overly frequent, are quite well built up and executed. But any way you slice it, you took a classic ghost story and slapped a bunch of the Conjuring scares onto it. It's what I like to call a funhouse movie. Isn't really scary, might give you a bit of a thrill, but ultimately it's just a bunch of boo jump scares. Even the Woman in Black herself is turned into little more than a computer-generated Halloween decoration. Beyond that, you have a fairly repetitive story. He goes to the house and witnesses creepy shit, goes back to the village where someone dies, goes back to the house and witnesses creepy shit, goes back to the village where someone dies, etc, etc. On top of this, the ending, quite different to the original novel, rubbed me the wrong way. Yes, the 1989 version also changed things a little from the novel's ending, but it was only slight and it was much more effective. Here it came off corny and lacked the chill of the novel or the 89 version's endings. If you're looking for a slightly more upmarket The Conjuring, where people walk down corridors and wait to get jumped by ghost muggers wearing balaclavas, then you could go worse. It has the advantage of having been based on a decent ghost story and having some good direction and set design. There are a couple of silly jump scares, especially when the woman in black is computer generated. One of the better embellishments from the original story is the addition of Arthur's sidekick character, Samuel Daly, having a wife who is not only completely off her meds due to the death of her son, to the point of dressing up small dogs and sitting them down at the dinner table and generally treating them like babies, but at one point becomes possessed by the spirit of a dead child, resulting in one of the funnier scenes in the film.
The Craft. Girls, watch out for those weirdos.
We are the weirdos, mister.
Glenn, you might be asking, alone in your room and out loud for some reason, why are you reviewing a movie clearly intended for teenage girls? Well, I could ask you, what are you doing watching a review of a movie clearly intended for teenage girls? For that matter, why don't you have a job? Why are your parents disappointed in you? What are you doing on that chair with that rope around your neck? There are many questions in this world for which there are no answers. For now, let me tell you about this movie for teenage girls. So this is one of those movies that I've seen several times but I always forget about. As such, I end up watching it again and then forgetting about it again, only to then watch it again. I repeat this process until someone intervenes. As of yet, no one has. But evidently someone didn't forget about this movie, because not only is it a bit of a cult film, but it also has finally garnered a sequel from the acclaimed Blumhouse Productions. To comment on it quickly, I'm not sure whether it's supposed to be a remake or a sequel. The similar premise, teenage girl moves to new town, goes to new school, meets weird witch friends, hilarity ensues, and the whole light as a feather stiff as a board thing from the original suggests remake. Meanwhile, the subtitle Legacy, and the inclusion of pics of Fairuza Balk's character, also from the original, suggests sequel. Aside from this ambiguity, it's what you expect from a modern trailer. Vaguely feminist sentiments, intercut with an ambient, monged-out version of Girls Just Wanna Have Fun, along with David Duchovny reprising his role as Fox Mulder from The X-Files, presumably to investigate evidence of sassy teenage witchcraft. But I have to say, I'm disappointed. Being a die-hard Meninist, I am shocked and appalled that Hollywood hasn't lived up to its commitment to diversity and just gender-swapped the whole thing. I mean, clearly everyone is crying out for an all-male version of this film. Ah! Get away! Kill it! Ah! So the original film begins with Sarah, played by Robin Tunney, moving to Los Angeles with her father and stepmother, and immediately I'm getting deja vu because Jesus, if Robin Tunney doesn't look almost exactly like Kristen Stewart in Twilight. Sarah endures her first day of school and ends up making friends with three outcast schoolgirls. Bonnie, played by Neve Campbell, who sports burns over a good portion of her body. Rochelle, played by Rachel True, who is the black one. And Nancy, played by Fairuza Balk, who one fluctuates between wanting to sleep with on the one hand, and on the other, to feed her raw meat from the safety of an underwater cage. As it happens, the three girls are looking for a fourth to complete their coven and become all-powerful witches. Upon becoming all-powerful, they do exactly what you'd expect teenage girls to do. Use said power to settle personal grievances with other schoolgirls. And change their hair colour. Okay, that's unfair. Nancy does end up using her power to kill her abusive trailer trash father, resulting in she and her mother receiving a hefty life insurance payout. Sarah, on the other hand, uses her power to cast a love spell on a football player who spread rumours about her, and turns him into a simp who carries her books for her. Bonnie gets rid of the burns on her body and goes to school the next day bearing some skin, and Rochelle makes the blonde bitch's hair fall out after she receives some mildly racist abuse from her. Of course, such things have their price, as Sarah's unfortunate paramour hangs around outside her house watching her sleep. For some reason, she agrees to go on another date with him where he attempts to force himself on her. And to be honest, what was anyone expecting? You turn him into a male feminist and then act shocked when he tries to rape you? And yet, despite the schoolboy lies, horrific simping, creepy behaviour, and even the attempted rape, all in all it was still a better love story than Twilight. For Bonnie and Rochelle, there isn't that much in the way of comeuppance. They see themselves as in the mirror looking like the very things they fear to be and then run away, leaving Nancy to finish off Sarah. And really, that's where my criticism of this film lies. If anything, it's just not edgy enough. Sarah almost gets raped, Bonnie and Rochelle just kinda lose their powers by the end. In fact, the most memorable and perhaps edgiest element of the film is Fairuza Balk as Nancy, who chews the scenery with that gaping maw of hers and ends up being responsible for the film's 2 solitary deaths, and even then one of those probably lends itself more to high cholesterol than witchcraft. Overall though, it ends up being just as you probably suspected earlier, forgettable. Perhaps relatable enough for teenage girls to garner some cult status, but nowhere near shocking enough for any seasoned horror fans. But then, what did I expect? It's a film for teenage girls. Forgettable? Sure. Lacking in any real horror? Affirmative. Entertaining? Well, you could go worse shoving something on for your 90s nostalgia meetup. It's got that Buffy the Vampire Slayer aesthetic that's kinda nice to see once in a while. Maybe that's why I end up watching it once every few years. It's a decade I grew up in, and for all its flaws, it represents the time and period rather nicely. Plus, it has a decent cover of Peter Gabriel's I Have the Touch in the end credits, so there's that. Not only does it have some questionable effects, Fairuza Balk's scenery chewing is the most fun you'll have with this film, especially towards the end where she's floating several feet off the ground, slamming Sarah into walls and generally going completely apeshit.
We're going to finish the job we started.
You didn't know that I'm a ninja.
While I am state-of-the-art, I am not a ninja.
Aussie filmmaker Lee Wannell made a name for himself creating, writing and acting in such films and franchises as the Saw series and Insidious series, Dead Silence and Cooties. Whether you consider these examples of cinematic genius or outright war crimes, one must admit the guy will go down as highly influential in the annals of horror cinema. Personally, I have kind of a love-hate relationship with the guy. Saw? Dead Silence? It's okay if you like overlong episodes of Tales from the Crypt. Insidious? Well, the only one I really liked was the second one, and that's because it was a high-level idiot movie. But I've always watched him with interest, because even in some of the crap he's made, he's always had some fun ideas. And now we get to Upgrade, probably his best film in my humble opinion. The film follows mechanic and technophobe Gray Trace, who may have the most boring sci-fi name of all time. He and his wife are targeted by a group of hired assassins who proceed to kill her and paralyze Gray from the neck down. Grieving and suicidal, a tech mogul offers to implant him with a special chip which will give him the ability to walk again. Shortly after the procedure, Gray finds that not only is he able to walk again, but the implant talks to him and can also, with his permission, take control of his body, turning him into a near unstoppable fighting machine. With this newfound help, Gray goes about the task of tracking down and taking revenge on the people who killed his wife. Fairly simple premise with a more than competent execution. Lee Wannell not only writes but takes the directing share in this one. With Upgrade, he manages to merge the genres of cyberpunk, body horror and revenge movie, all of which I'm a fan of, in a manner that may appeal to the average moviegoer, but without toning things down too much. There's darkness and tragedy, of course, but not so much that it becomes pretentious or loses the entertainment value. Yeah, it has a tendency to overdo it on the comedy, something that's kind of common in Lee Wannell's work. And there are 1 or 2 holes needing plastered over, but it's well directed, shot nicely, especially in the fight scenes, and the sci-fi set design is quite pretty to look at. It is a bit baby's first cyberpunk, but there's nothing overly wrong with that. Just know going in that you aren't about to see that long sought after Neuromancer adaptation. For gore fans, the violence is bloody and over the top, with 1 or 2 genuinely shocking moments and a refreshing lack of CG. As a standard, it has that Saw-esque twist at the end, which probably raises a few more questions on its own, but it works overall. I genuinely enjoyed this one, and it made me interested to see Lee's recent take on The Invisible Man, again for Blumhouse. It's a simple movie with a simple idea, and that's usually what I like. I'd even go far as to say that it's probably the sort of movie that my favourite director, John Carpenter, may have made back in his heyday of the 80s. Flawed, but a genuine treat. There are some moments where the implant takes over Gray's body to take down multiple opponents with ease as he mugs in utter shock and amazement that may clash with the overall dark tone of the movie, but nonetheless gain a chuckle or two from me. Anyways, that's all for now. I'm DeadEye and I hope you all rot in hell.